So that was an eventful week, and for Welsh Rugby, that's saying quite a lot. Of course, we had the squad announcement for the Six Nations, but the main thing was the news that got leaked that Y11 were looking to buy Cardiff and what the ramifications were for the Ospreys if that were to take place. There was, of course, a lot of questions and a lack of any sort of clarity. This led to a lot of people voicing their opinions that they're not happy. On Friday, the Ospreys supporters all lit their phones up at the 11th minute to let Y11 know that they're not happy with what's going on and that they're united with the players and the club. But with all this uncertainty that went on throughout the week, I have seen quite a few people online talking about a potential player strike. And the main reason they're talking about it, it comes from a quote or statement from the WRPA, which is representing the Welsh players as a whole. And it says, quote, "While certain assurances were provided, the WRPA was unequivocal and that continued uncertainty is placing unacceptable strain on players, staff and their families." I agreed with that. "Prolonged ambiguity around contracts, recruitment and future planning is directly impacting players' welfare, and timely, transparent and direct communication is essential." Which is fair enough. The bit that got people's attention was this second bit. It was a big statement, but I'm just pulled these bits out. It says, quote, "We have made it clear, meaningful clarity on arrangements for next season must be provided no later than the 6th of February. This deadline is essential to prevent further disruption, provide stability and allow players and clubs to make informed decisions. Failure to deliver this certainty by this point would inevitably require players to consider their positions and next step." People took that to be a threat of strike, basically, and it kind of does sound that way. This, of course, is the day before the first game of the Six Nations against England. This reminds me of the last strike, which was only February of 2003, so it wasn't even that long ago, where the strike before the England game was threatened and Ken Owens stood up there with Nigel Walker. It's great to see that it's changed. This then was met with a reply from Lance Bradley, I guess at the behest of Y11, and he says, crucially, he had a big statement, but he said, "Crucially, I want to make it clear that Ospreys will continue to play in the URC and EPCR competitions until at least the end of the season 26 to 27. Here at the Ospreys, we are fully focused on the remainder of this season and we are making the usual preparations for next season." So he kind of put to bed the fact that there was definitely going to be rugby next season and of course for the end of this season, but then it leaves up in the air what happens past that. And that puts the WRPA now in kind of an interesting position because they've got some clarity on what the up and coming 18 months is. But past that, where does it leave the Ospreys and their players and their staff? Well, again, it just leaves them in this ambiguity, this grey area. They don't know what's going on. So with that in mind, would the players still, unless they get some clearer answers, be willing to go on strike before the England game? And you can't necessarily compare this to the previous time that we were talking about in 2003, because that involved basically every player that was based in Wales, and that was the PRA. It's a little bit of a different situation here. I think it would be difficult for them as a whole to decide that they are going to strike, but I do, and I kind of hope that if they did really want to strike because they weren't happy, that all of the players would back them and all strike, or even though you potentially assume that some or all of the other three regions are safe. And I think that would show a lot of solidarity, and I think that's the way they would go if the strike was to take place. I gotta be honest, I don't think it is going to take place. I think Y11 or the WRU will use this 18 months now to kind of say, well, we're going to see what happens. We've given you a bit of a runway for a little bit to see what happens, because also they've got the contract of the URC that they've got to honour, so they kind of need to keep playing in that competition as well. So at the moment they've got 60 days to get the finalisation of this deal between Y11 and Cardiff and the WRU. Up until that point, they're just going to say it's the 60-day period. We can't talk about it. We'll let you know at the end. Lance Bradley kind of alluded to that later on in his statement, but I'm not going to read through it all. So up until then, they're not going to have any issues. They're going to have a ready-made excuse. That's going to take us into the Six Nations over that 60-day period. So it kind of puts a big dent in this strike action. But will it happen later on down the line? I mean, if it gets to halfway through next season and there's still no clarity, it's still in the situation where it is now, then it's going to be impossible for any preparation for the Ospreys to commence for the season after. How can they sign players? How can they re-sign players? How can they retain staff? They're not going to be able to do it. So they're going to need clarity by then. Will they get clarity by then? Well, it's the WRU, and everything seems to take months and years longer than it's supposed to have been, where their deadlines, this was supposed to be sorted out before Christmas. Now it's gone into February, and it'll probably rattle on further on. If this carries on for another 6 to 12 months, I think a potential player strike could happen, especially if the Ospreys can get enough support through the player base of the rest of them. Should they stick together? Yes, because if they're willing to come for the Ospreys now, what's to say 10 years they don't come for someone else? They don't come for the Dragons, they don't come for the Scarlets, they don't come for Cardiff and just make it East and West. You just can't trust anything that comes out the WRU's mouth now. So I don't see there being precedent for strike action yet, given what the statements have been over the last few days. But in the future, it's not off the table. Let me know what you think, and I will catch you on the next one.